Ambassador Sarah Chen stood in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, her black diplomatic uniform a stark contrast against the gleaming crystal walls that stretched impossibly high above her head. The chamber hummed with alien whispers in languages that sounded like musical instruments being tortured. Thousands of representatives from across the galaxy sat in floating pods, their eyes fixed on the lone human figure standing in the center of the vast space. Sarah had trained for this moment her entire life. She was humanity's first official envoy to the Galactic Council, chosen from billions of candidates for her brilliant mind, her ability to speak 17 alien languages, and her unwavering dedication to peaceful diplomacy. Earth's greatest scientists and philosophers had spent decades preparing for this first contact, crafting careful words that would introduce humanity as a species worthy of respect and cooperation. The council chamber was a marvel that defied human understanding of architecture. Crystalline spires twisted through the air like frozen lightning, each one housing different species in environmental pods suited to their biology. The Zephyrian delegates floated in spheres of poisonous gas that shimmered purple and green. The rock-like Terrans sat motionless in chambers filled with molten lava. Aquatic species swam in enormous tanks of bioluminescent water that cast dancing shadows across the walls. At the center of it all sat the High Arbiter Vexthaner, a being so ancient that its species had been extinct for millennia before humanity had even discovered fire. Its body was a writhing mass of tentacles and eyes, suspended in a sphere of liquid energy that crackled with raw power. When it spoke, reality itself seemed to bend around its words. Human, the High Arbiter's voice boomed through the chamber, translating instantly into Sarah's mind through the neural implant all visitors received. You stand before the Council of 1,000 Worlds, representing a species that has barely learned to leave its birth world. What makes you believe humanity deserves a place among the civilized races of this galaxy? Sarah took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. She had practiced this speech countless times, but, standing here under the gaze of beings who had mastered the secrets of the universe while humans were still living in caves, she felt the weight of her entire species' future resting on her shoulders. Honored representatives of the Galactic Council, she began, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. Humanity comes before you not as conquerors or supplicants, but as fellow travelers on the long journey toward understanding. We are young, yes, but youth brings fresh perspectives and boundless energy. We offer our creativity, our resilience, and our unique human capacity for growth and adaptation. A ripple of what sounded like laughter echoed through the chamber. The Kethmoran representative, a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a computer terminal, clicked its mandibles in amusement. Creativity and resilience, it transmitted mockingly. Every primitive species claims these qualities. What have you actually accomplished that would benefit this council? Sarah had expected this question. She activated her portable holographic projector, filling the air above her with images of human achievement. Earth's greatest artworks rotated slowly in the air, magnificent symphonies played through the chamber's speakers, and scenes of human scientific breakthroughs unfolded before the assembled delegates. We offer music that can move hearts across species barriers, Sarah said as Beethoven's Ninth Symphony swelled around them. Several delegates leaned forward in their pods, clearly affected by the emotional power of the composition. We offer art that captures the beauty and pain of existence in ways that transcend mere visual representation. The holographic display shifted to show human cities, bustling with life and innovation. Skyscrapers reached toward the clouds while underground metros carried millions of people through networks of gleaming tunnels. Space stations orbited Earth like artificial moons, while the first human colonies on Mars showed domed cities where children played in parks under artificial suns. We offer the perspective of a species that has learned to thrive on a world of extremes, Sarah continued. Humans have adapted to every environment on our planet, from frozen wastelands to scorching deserts, from the depths of the ocean to the heights of mountains. We bring the wisdom of survivors and the ingenuity of builders. But, as Sarah spoke, she began to notice something troubling in the way the delegates were looking at her. What she had initially taken for interest was starting to look more like the way a scientist might study an interesting specimen. The whispers among the delegates were growing louder, and she caught fragments of conversation through her translator that made her stomach clench with growing dread. Dangerous potential. Historically aggressive species. Contamination risk. The High Arbiter raised one massive tentacle, and silence fell over the chamber like a physical weight. Its ancient eyes, each one the size of Sarah's head, focused on her with an intensity that made her feel like she was being dissected at the molecular level. Human, Vex Thaner's voice rumbled through the chamber. Your species shows certain, troubling patterns. Our xenoarchaeologists have studied your world extensively. They report a history marked by constant warfare, environmental destruction, and an alarming tendency toward rapid technological advancement without corresponding wisdom. Sarah felt her carefully prepared diplomatic responses crumbling in her throat. This wasn't going according to any scenario they had planned for back on Earth. Honored Arbiter, every species has struggled with growing pains. We have learned from our mistakes and are committed to peaceful coexistence, have you? The voice came from the Ethereal Collective's representative, a being of pure energy that spoke in harmonics that made Sarah's bones vibrate. Your species achieved nuclear fusion and immediately used it to create weapons. You developed space travel and, within decades, were testing weapons in orbit. Even now, as you speak to us of peace, your homeworld bristles with enough destructive capability to sterilize a dozen planets. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Sarah realized with growing horror that this wasn't a diplomatic meeting at all. It was a trial, and humanity had already been judged guilty. The Galactic Council has maintained peace for over 1,000,000 years, announced Councillor Thekvar of the Dominion Empire, his voice like grinding stone. We have achieved this through careful management of which species are permitted to join our ranks. We do not allow the introduction of chaos elements that could destabilize the order we have so carefully maintained. Sarah's diplomatic training finally kicked in fully, and she straightened her spine with fierce determination. You judge us by our past without considering our potential future. Yes, humanity has struggled with violence and environmental challenges, but we have also shown an unprecedented capacity for moral growth. We abolished slavery, we learned to cooperate across tribal and national boundaries, we developed ethics that value individual rights while promoting collective welfare. She gestured to her holographic display, bringing up images of humans working together during natural disasters, scientists from different nations collaborating on research projects, and volunteers dedicating their lives to helping others. We are not the same species that fought with stone tools 10,000 years ago. We evolved not just biologically, but socially and morally. Give us the chance to prove that we can be valuable partners in building a better galaxy. But the murmurs in the chamber were growing uglier. Sarah caught more fragments through her translator, words that made her blood run cold. Viral contamination of peaceful species. Historical precedent suggests extermination. Cleanse before spread. The High Arbiter's tentacles writhed in what Sarah was beginning to recognize as the alien equivalent of nodding in agreement. The Council has reached consensus, Vex Thaner announced, its voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Humanity represents an unacceptable contamination risk to galactic civilization. Your species' aggressive tendencies and rapid technological development mark you as what we classify as a pestilence species. Sarah felt the floor dropping out from under her feet. A pestilence species? What does that mean? The answer came from Dr. Kelnoth of the Science Directorate, a spider-like being whose voice carried the cold precision of absolute certainty. It means your species exhibits behavioral patterns that, if allowed to spread, would inevitably lead to the collapse of civilized order throughout the galaxy. History has shown us that such species, if permitted to achieve interstellar capability, will inevitably wage war against peaceful civilizations. But we haven't waged war against anyone. Sarah protested desperately. We come seeking friendship and cooperation. Yet, rumbled the representative of the warrior clans of Zeroth. Your species has not yet encountered serious resistance. When you do, you will reveal your true nature. We have seen this pattern repeated across thousands of worlds over millions of years. It always ends the same way. The High Arbiter raised its massive bulk higher in its energy sphere, and Sarah realized with dawning terror that this was more than just a rejection of humanity's application for council membership. The way the delegates were looking at her now, the way the chamber's security fields were beginning to shimmer more brightly around the edges, told her that something far more sinister was about to happen. The Galactic Council hereby declares humanity a threat to galactic peace and stability, Vex Thaner announced with the finality of a death sentence. Under Article 7 of the Galactic Preservation Protocols, immediate action must be taken to contain this threat. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. She activated her emergency transmitter, sending a desperate message back to Earth's command center. This is Ambassador Chen. Emergency Protocol 7. The Council has declared humanity a threat. Their planning, her transmission was cut off as energy fields surrounded her. But it wasn't a simple containment field. The air around Sarah began to glow with intense heat, and she realized with absolute horror what was about to happen. According to galactic law, the High Arbiter continued as if Sarah wasn't being slowly incinerated alive. The representative of a pestilence species must be eliminated to prevent contamination spread, and the species' homeworld must be sterilized before it can spread its influence beyond its birth system. Sarah's diplomatic uniform began to smolder as the energy field intensified. Through the growing pain, she managed to gasp out one final desperate plea. "You're making a mistake. We can change. We can be better." But her words fell on deaf ears. The assembled representatives of 1,000 worlds watched with cold detachment as Ambassador Sarah Chen, humanity's first and last envoy to the Galactic Council, was slowly burned alive in the center of their grand chamber. Her screams echoed off the crystal walls, but not a single delegate moved to intervene. As the energy field reached lethal intensity, Sarah's last coherent thought was a prayer that her emergency transmission had somehow made it through to warn Earth of what was coming. The greatest minds of humanity had prepared her for diplomatic challenges, cultural misunderstandings, and even potential rejection. But no one had prepared her for this cold, calculated genocide disguised as galactic justice. The High Arbiter waited until there was nothing left of the human ambassador except scattered atoms drifting in the chamber's recycled air. Then, it turned to address the Council with the satisfaction of a job well done. "The contamination has been contained," Vexthaner announced. "Now we must discuss the sterilization of the human homeworld before this pestilence can spread further into our peaceful galaxy. I call for an immediate vote on deploying the purification fleet." In the vast chamber of the Galactic Council, 1,000 worlds prepared to commit the ultimate act of genocide, believing themselves to be the protectors of civilization. They had no idea that they had just made the most catastrophic mistake in galactic history. Far away in the depths of space, automated monitoring stations were already detecting the energy signatures of approaching human vessels. Not the peaceful exploration ships the Council expected from a young species, but something far more ominous. Ships that moved through space like predators stalking prey, carrying weapons that even the ancient archives of the Council had no record of. The delegates celebrated their swift action against the human threat, unaware that humanity's true nature was not the primitive aggression they feared, but something far more dangerous, the infinite capacity to adapt, evolve, and become something utterly unprecedented when pushed beyond the breaking point. The burning of Ambassador Chen was not the end of humanity's story in the galaxy. It was merely the prologue to a war that would reshape the fundamental nature of galactic civilization itself. Admiral Marcus Kane stood in the command center of the UES Retribution, humanity's most advanced warship, staring at the holographic display that showed the smoldering remains of what had once been the Zephyrian home fleet. Around him, the bridge crew worked with the cold efficiency of professionals who had just witnessed something that would haunt their dreams for the rest of their lives. The silence in the chamber was broken only by the soft hum of life support systems and the occasional beep of monitoring equipment. 3 months had passed since Ambassador Chen's emergency transmission had reached Earth. 3 months since humanity had learned that the galaxy they had dreamed of joining was ruled by genocidal fanatics who saw human children as vermin to be exterminated. 3 months since everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe had been burned away along with their first ambassador. The transformation had been swift and terrible. Within hours of receiving Chen's final message, every major government on Earth had activated protocols that most citizens never knew existed. The peaceful space exploration fleet that had been humanity's pride became the backbone of something far more sinister. Research stations throughout the solar system were converted into weapons factories. The Mars colonies became staging grounds for military operations. The asteroid mining operations were retooled to harvest materials for a war machine that grew larger and more sophisticated with each passing day. But the most profound change had been in humanity itself. The species that had spent the last century slowly learning to overcome its tribal instincts, to cooperate across national and cultural boundaries, to dream of peaceful exploration among the stars, had united with a clarity of purpose that was both inspiring and terrifying. Every human on Earth, Mars, and the orbital stations understood that they were facing extinction. And humanity's response to that threat was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Admiral, called Lieutenant Commander Sarah Zhang from her station at Tactical Analysis. We're receiving surrender transmissions from the remaining Zephyrian vessels. They're asking for mercy. Kane turned his cold gaze to the display showing the scattered debris of what had been the Zephyrian Third Fleet just 20 minutes earlier. These had been the ships sent to sterilize the human homeworld, equipped with weapons capable of cracking planets and turning entire star systems into lifeless wastes. Now they drifted as expanding clouds of superheated plasma and twisted metal. Mercy, Kane repeated the word as if it were a foreign concept. Did they show mercy to Ambassador Chen when they burned her alive? Did they plan to show mercy to the children of Earth? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Everyone on the bridge knew the answer. The intercepted communications from the Galactic Council had been quite clear about their intentions. Not just the elimination of humanity, but the complete sterilization of Earth and every human colony. Men, women, children, even the terraforming bacteria that humanity had seeded on Mars. Total extinction was the Council's plan, carried out with the same casual efficiency they might use to exterminate a plague of insects. Sir, Zhang continued, her voice carefully controlled. The Zephyrian commander is transmitting on all frequencies. She's claiming they were just following orders, that they bear no personal animosity toward humanity. Kane's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. Following orders. How remarkably familiar. He moved to his command chair, a piece of equipment that had been redesigned specifically for humanity's new role in the galaxy. Unlike the elegant, comfortable chairs used by peaceful species, Kane's command position was a fortress of armor and weapons systems, surrounded by tactical displays that could coordinate the movements of entire fleets across multiple star systems. Around the Retribution, the rest of the human fleet hung in space like apex predators pausing to consider their next meal. These were not the exploration vessels that humanity had originally sent to the stars. The sleek lines and gleaming hulls of peaceful ships had been replaced by angular, predatory designs that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Each vessel bristled with weapons that human scientists had developed in a frenzy of creative destruction over the past 3 months. The technology was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. While other species had spent millions of years perfecting energy weapons and defensive shields, humanity had taken a completely different approach. The human weapons combined kinetic projectiles with exotic matter manipulation, creating weapons that didn't just destroy enemy ships but unmade them at a fundamental level. Zephyrian vessels that had withstood the firepower of entire battle fleets simply ceased to exist when touched by human weapons. Admiral, reported Commander Rodriguez from the navigation station. Long-range sensors are detecting another Council fleet approaching from the Zerov system. Approximately 400 vessels, mixed species configuration. Estimated arrival time is 6 hours. Kane nodded slowly. This was the third Council fleet they had encountered since beginning their campaign 3 weeks ago. Each time, the pattern was the same. The Council forces would arrive expecting to face a primitive species with crude weapons and simple tactics. Instead, they encountered something that their million-year-old tactical databases had no protocols for dealing with. The first engagement had been against a Terran mining fleet that the Council had hastily converted to military use. The rock-like aliens had approached the human forces with the confidence of beings who had never known defeat in battle. Their ships were mobile fortresses, bristling with weapons that could level cities and protected by shields that had turned aside the firepower of entire armadas. The battle had lasted 17 minutes. Not a single human vessel had even been scratched. Sir, interrupted Lieutenant Yu from the communications station. We're receiving a transmission from Earth Command. Priority Alpha clearance. Kane activated his personal communication system, and the image of General Patricia Hayes appeared in a secure holographic field around his chair. Hayes looked like she had aged a decade in the 3 months since the crisis began. Her uniform was crisp and her bearing was military perfect, but her eyes held the weight of decisions that no human in history had ever been forced to make.
Admiral Kane, Hayes said without preamble.
Intelligence Division has finished analyzing the data you recovered from the Kethmoran command vessel. The situation is worse than we thought. Kane felt a chill run down his spine. After 3 months of non-stop warfare, after learning that the galaxy was ruled by genocidal fanatics who viewed humanity as vermin to be exterminated, he had thought nothing could shock him anymore.
He was wrong. How much worse, General?
Hayes activated a holographic star map that showed the local galactic sector. Red zones marked Council territories, while a small blue dot indicated human space. But, as Kane watched, the red zones began to expand, showing projected invasion routes and sterilization schedules. The Council isn't just planning to eliminate humanity, Hayes said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute horror. We've uncovered evidence of 17 previous pestilence species that were completely wiped out over the past 50,000 years. The Council has been systematically committing xenocide for millennia, eliminating any species that shows potential for rapid development or independent thinking.
Kane stared at the map in stunned silence.
Each red zone represented not just a military target, but the grave of an entire civilization. Billions of beings who had dreamed of exploring the stars, creating art, raising their children in peace, all burned away because they had the audacity to grow too quickly or think too independently for the Council's taste.
There's more, Hayes continued. The data suggests that there are resistance movements throughout the galaxy.
Species that survived the initial purges by hiding or fleeing to the galactic rim. They'd been waiting for something to change the balance of power.
And they think we're that something, Kane concluded. The intercepted communications are clear.
Several underground networks are already reaching out, offering intelligence and support. They see what we've done to the Council fleets as proof that the tide might finally be turning. Kane looked out at his fleet, at the human vessels that had transformed from peaceful explorers into instruments of retribution in just 3 months. Each ship represented not just advanced technology, but a fundamental shift in how humanity saw itself and its place in the universe. They were no longer the hopeful young species seeking acceptance among the stars. They were the galaxy's immune system, evolved to eliminate a cancer that had been growing unchecked for millennia.
General, Kane said slowly, what are your orders? Hayes' expression was grim but determined.
The President and the Global Council have reached a unanimous decision.
We cannot allow the Galactic Council to continue their campaign of systematic genocide. Our official mission statement is now regime change. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war against the entire galaxy.
But Kane found himself nodding in agreement.
Humanity had tried diplomacy and been betrayed.
They had offered friendship and been marked for extinction. Now there was only one language the Council seemed to understand.
Admiral, reported Commander Zhang from Tactical.
The approaching Council fleet has just transmitted a surrender offer. They're willing to withdraw from human space in exchange for our agreement to remain confined to the Sol system.
Kane turned to look at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy fleet.
400 vessels representing a dozen different species, all united in their belief that humanity needed to be contained or destroyed.
All convinced that they represented civilization while humans represented chaos. Prepare a response transmission, Kane ordered.
Sir, what should the message say? Kane was quiet for a long moment, thinking of Ambassador Chen burning alive while 1,000 worlds watched and did nothing. Thinking of the 17 extinct species whose only crime had been developing too quickly for the Council's taste. Thinking of human children playing in Earth's parks, unaware that an entire galaxy had voted to murder them in their sleep. Tell them, Kane said with the cold finality of absolute judgment, that humanity does not negotiate with genocidal fanatics. Tell them that we remember Ambassador Chen, and we remember the 17 species that came before us.
Tell them that we are coming for them all. The transmission was sent on all frequencies, translated into every major galactic language.
Across the approaching Council fleet, alien commanders listened to humanity's response with growing dread. This was not the desperate plea of a cornered primitive species. This was the declaration of a predator that had finally decided to stop hiding its true nature. As the human fleet began to move toward the approaching enemy, each vessel's engines left trails of exotic particles that seemed to bend space itself around them. The ships moved with a fluid grace that spoke of technologies the Council had never imagined, weapons systems that operated on principles their scientists couldn't comprehend. On the bridge of the Retribution, Admiral Kane watched the tactical display as his fleet arranged itself into attack formation. Each ship's captain had been carefully selected for their ability to function under the extreme psychological pressure of total war. Each crew had been trained to operate as a single, unified organism dedicated to one purpose: the complete elimination of the Galactic Council's ability to commit genocide. "All vessels report ready for engagement," reported Commander Rodriguez. "Admiral," added Lieutenant Yu from Communications, "we're receiving signals from several Council ships. They're asking for one final chance to negotiate." Kane looked out at the enemy fleet, at the ships carrying weapons designed to sterilize worlds and exterminate entire species. Ships crewed by beings who had voted to murder humanity's children without even meeting them. "Signal the fleet," Kane ordered. "All vessels are authorized to engage with extreme prejudice. No prisoners, no survivors, no mercy. We are humanity's answer to 1,000,000 years of galactic genocide, and our answer is extinction." The human fleet surged forward like a school of predatory fish sensing blood in the water. Behind them, Earth's orbital shipyards worked around the clock to produce more vessels, while human colonies throughout the solar system prepared for a war that would either end with humanity's liberation or its complete destruction. But, as Admiral Kane watched his weapons systems lock onto their targets, he felt a cold satisfaction that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with justice. The galaxy had tried to exterminate humanity for being too aggressive, too unpredictable, too dangerous. They were about to learn that they had been absolutely right to be afraid. The great chamber of the Galactic Council lay in ruins. Where once crystal spires had twisted impossibly through the air, now only jagged stumps remained, their surfaces blackened and scarred by weapons that had unmade matter at the quantum level. The floating pods that had once housed representatives from 1,000 worlds hung empty and dark, their occupants long since fled or destroyed. At the center of it all, where High Arbiter Vex Thaner had once held court, stood a simple metal chair occupied by a human woman in a crisp black uniform. President Elena Vesquez of the United Earth Federation looked out over the assembled delegates with eyes that had seen too much in the past 6 months. The beings before her were a mixture of survivors from the old council and representatives of species that had emerged from hiding after humanity's campaign had shattered the ancient order. Some watched her with gratitude, others with barely concealed terror. All of them understood that the galaxy would never be the same. The transformation had been swift and merciless. After Admiral Kane's fleet had eliminated the Fourth Council Armada sent to contain humanity, word had spread throughout the galaxy that the impossible had happened. The ancient Galactic Council, rulers of 1,000,000 worlds for over 1,000,000 years, had been challenged by a species barely 200,000 years old and found wanting. The campaign that followed had lasted just 4 months, but, in that time humanity had rewritten the fundamental rules of galactic warfare. While other species had spent eons perfecting energy weapons and defensive systems, human scientists had developed weapons that operated outside the traditional electromagnetic spectrum. Kinetic projectiles that existed partially outside normal spacetime, gravity bombs that could collapse stars, nanite swarms that could disassemble entire fleets at the molecular level. But, the true weapon had been humanity's tactical doctrine. Where other species fought wars according to ancient protocols refined over millions of years, humans had approached each battle as a unique problem requiring creative solutions. They used psychological warfare that drove enemy crews to madness, information warfare that turned enemy fleets against each other, and strategic deception that made their forces appear simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. The Terran Empire, confident in their impregnable fortress worlds, had awakened one morning to find their planet surrounded by human vessels that had somehow materialized inside their defensive perimeters. The ethereal collective, masters of energy manipulation, had watched in horror as their most powerful weapons simply passed through human ships that had learned to phase in and out of physical reality. The ancient Dominion, rulers of 100,000 worlds, had seen their entire governmental structure collapse when human infiltrators had simultaneously assassinated every member of their ruling council across 50 different star systems. But, perhaps the most devastating weapon in humanity's arsenal had been their ability to adapt and learn. Every engagement had taught them something new about their enemies' capabilities and weaknesses. Every captured alien database had revealed new technologies to be reverse-engineered and improved. Every defeated enemy had provided new allies among the species they had oppressed. President Vasquez stood from her chair and walked to the center of the chamber, her footsteps echoing in the vast space. Around her, holographic displays showed the current state of the galaxy, vast areas marked in blue to indicate human-controlled space, smaller green zones showing allied territories, and shrinking red areas where the remnants of the old council still held power. Representatives of the galaxy, she began, her voice carried to every corner of the chamber by translation systems that had been redesigned according to human specifications. We gather today not to celebrate conquest, but to establish a new order based on principles that the previous government found incompatible with their worldview. A ripple of nervous energy passed through the assembled delegates. The Kethmoran representative, one of only 3 survivors from the original council, shifted uncomfortably in its environmental pod. The insectoid being that had once mocked Ambassador Chen's claims of human creativity now watched humanity's leader with the careful attention of prey studying a predator. The Galactic Council that ruled from this chamber for 1,000,000 years was built on a foundation of fear, Vasquez continued. Fear of change, fear of growth, fear of species that might develop beyond their control. That fear led them to commit acts of genocide that claimed not just billions of lives, but entire civilizations rich with art, science, and culture that we will never recover. On cue, holographic displays filled the chamber with images recovered from human archaeological expeditions to the sites of the 17 extinct civilizations. Magnificent cities turned to glass, artistic treasures reduced to radioactive ash, entire worlds stripped of life because their inhabitants had shown too much promise for independent thought. The Aquatic Federation representative, a being that resembled a cross between an octopus and a jellyfish, transmitted a complex harmony of sounds that the translators rendered as deep remorse. The aquatic peoples offer formal recognition of past crimes against the extinct species. We were complicit in these acts through our silence, if not our direct participation. Similar declarations came from delegates throughout the chamber. Species after species formally acknowledged their role in the systematic genocide that the old council had called galactic stability maintenance. But Vasquez noted that several of the former council races remained silent, their representatives watching the proceedings with expressions that suggested they viewed this as a temporary setback rather than a permanent change. The Human Federation has no interest in replacing one tyranny with another, Vasquez continued. We did not fight this war to become the galaxy's new masters. We fought it to ensure that no species would ever again face extinction simply for being different, for growing too quickly, or for asking inconvenient questions. She gestured to her aide, Colonel Martinez, who activated a new set of holographic displays. These showed proposed territorial divisions, trade agreements, and defensive pacts that would reshape the political structure of the entire galaxy. We proposed the establishment of the Galactic Commonwealth, a federation of sovereign species united by common principles rather than ruled by ancient fears. Each member species will maintain autonomy over their internal affairs while contributing to collective security and mutual prosperity. The proposal was radical beyond anything the galaxy had seen in millions of years. Instead of the rigid hierarchical structure that had characterized the old council, with ancient species ruling over younger ones, the Commonwealth would operate on principles of equality and voluntary association. Species could join or leave as they chose, contribute according to their abilities, and benefit according to their needs. But not everyone in the chamber was pleased with the proposal. The surviving representative of the Dominion Empire, a being that looked like a crystalline spider made of living gemstones, pulsed with angry red light as it transmitted its response. The humans speak of equality and voluntary association, it declared, its words carrying harmonics of contempt. But they forget that they achieved their current position through overwhelming military force. How do we know this Commonwealth will not simply become another empire, ruled by human interests and enforced by human weapons? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Vasquez could feel the tension in the chamber as delegates waited to see how humanity's leader would respond. This was the crucial moment, the point where humanity would either prove their commitment to their stated principles or reveal themselves as just another conquering species with better public relations. Vasquez smiled, and the expression was genuinely warm rather than the predatory grin that galactic leaders had learned to fear from human commanders. An excellent question, Representative Thekniron. And the answer lies not in our words, but in our actions. She gestured again to Colonel Martinez, who brought up a new display showing human military forces throughout the galaxy. But, instead of the expected images of occupation fleets and garrison forces, the display showed human ships and personnel in the process of systematic withdrawal from conquered territories. As of this morning, human Federation forces have completed evacuation from 47 star systems previously under Council control. These systems are being returned to local governance, with human military presence limited to defensive stations requested by the local populations. A murmur of surprise rippled through the chamber.
This was unprecedented in galactic history.
No conquering species had ever voluntarily withdrawn from captured territory without being forced to do so by military defeat. Furthermore, Vasquez continued, humanity is sharing the advanced technologies we developed during the war with any species willing to commit to the Commonwealth's principles of non-aggression and mutual cooperation. We believe that security comes not from maintaining technological superiority, but from ensuring that all Commonwealth members have the ability to defend themselves against external threats.
The implications were staggering. Humanity was not just withdrawing from conquered territory, but actively arming their former enemies. Either this was the most sophisticated long-term strategy anyone had ever conceived, or humanity was actually serious about their commitment to equality and voluntary association. The silence in the chamber was broken by an unexpected voice.
The Zephyrian representative, whose fleet had been among the first to be destroyed by human forces, rose from her environmental pod and spoke with the formal cadence of someone making a historic declaration.
The Zephyrian Republic formally requests admission to the proposed Galactic Commonwealth. We pledge to abide by its principles and contribute to collective security.
We also formally apologize to humanity for our participation in the attempted genocide of your species, and we ask for the opportunity to make amends through future cooperation.
The declaration triggered an avalanche of similar requests.
Species after species stood to pledge their allegiance to the Commonwealth and formally renounced the genocidal policies of the old Council. But Vasquez noticed that several of the ancient species remained seated, their representatives watching the proceedings with expressions of calculating neutrality. The ethereal collective's representative, a being of pure energy that had once helped plan humanity's extinction, finally spoke in harmonics that made the chamber's walls vibrate. The collective acknowledges the military superiority demonstrated by human forces. We are willing to accept Commonwealth membership as the most practical path forward. However, we reserve the right to withdraw if human leadership proves as corrupt as that of the previous government. It was not the enthusiastic endorsement that some species had offered, but Vasquez recognized it as the best they could expect from beings who had ruled the galaxy for eons. The ancient species would require time to accept their new status as equals rather than masters, but at least they were willing to try. The Commonwealth will be governed by a rotating council with representatives from all member species, Vasquez announced. Leadership positions will be held for limited terms, and no single species will be permitted to hold permanent authority over others. Additionally, the Commonwealth Charter will include provisions for the protection of developing species, ensuring that no civilization will ever again face extinction for the crime of rapid growth.
She paused to let the implications sink in.
This was not just a political restructuring, but a fundamental shift in how galactic civilization would operate.
Instead of the static, controlled stagnation that the old Council had enforced, the Commonwealth would actively encourage diversity, innovation, and growth. There will be challenges, Vasquez acknowledged.
Millions of years of ingrained habits and prejudices cannot be overcome overnight. But humanity believes that the galaxy's greatest strength lies not in enforcing conformity, but in celebrating the unique contributions that each species brings to our common future. As she spoke, the chamber's display showed images of the future that human planners had envisioned: mixed-species research stations pushing the boundaries of science, cultural exchange programs that would share art and philosophy across species barriers, exploration fleets that would map the uncharted regions of the galaxy with crews drawn from dozens of different worlds. But perhaps the most powerful image was the simplest: children from different species playing together in orbital parks, growing up in a galaxy where diversity was celebrated rather than feared, where rapid development was encouraged rather than punished, where asking inconvenient questions was seen as the first step toward finding better answers. The vote to establish the Galactic Commonwealth was unanimous among the attending delegates, though Vasquez noted that several ancient species abstained rather than voting in favor. It was a start, but she knew that the real work was just beginning. Building a galactic civilization based on voluntary cooperation rather than enforced submission would require patience, wisdom, and the willingness to occasionally back up noble principles with overwhelming force. As the delegates began filing out of the chamber to begin the complex process of implementing their decisions, Vasquez remained standing at the center of the vast space. Around her, the ruins of the old council served as a reminder of what happened when governments ruled through fear rather than consent. But she also knew that those same ruins represented humanity's promise to the galaxy: never again would a species face extinction for the crime of being different.
Colonel Martinez approached and saluted. "Madam President, Admiral Kane is requesting permission to begin the final phase of withdrawal from former Council territories."
He also reports that several species in the Andromeda contact zone are requesting Commonwealth protection from what appear to be extragalactic threats.
Vasquez nodded slowly.
The galaxy was vast, and humanity's victory over the old council had attracted attention from forces beyond their current sphere of influence. New challenges would require new solutions, and the Commonwealth would need to prove that voluntary cooperation could succeed where authoritarian control had ultimately failed.
Approved, Colonel. And signal Admiral Kane that he has full authorization to begin diplomatic contact with the Andromeda representatives. It's time to find out what other neighbors we have been unknowingly sharing the universe with.
As she walked toward the chamber's exit, President Vasquez reflected on how far humanity had come in just 6 months. They had entered the galactic community as hopeful supplicants seeking acceptance among the stars. They were leaving as the architects of a new order based on principles that most species had forgotten even existed. The galaxy would never be the same, but, for the first time in millions of years, it might actually become a place where any species could grow, explore, and reach for greatness without fear of extermination.
Ambassador Sarah Chen had died believing that humanity could earn its place among the stars through peaceful cooperation.
In a way, her sacrifice had made the dream possible, though the path to achieving it had been far bloodier than she could ever have imagined. Outside the ruined council chamber, the first ships of the Commonwealth fleet were already taking their positions as guardians of the new order. They flew under flags that combined human designs with symbols from dozens of member species, a visible reminder that the galaxy's future would be built through cooperation rather than conquest. The age of genocidal empires was ending, and the age of diversity, growth, and unlimited possibility was about to begin.